Hello and welcome to a special edition of the Weekly Law Report. I'm Stephanie Quine. Lawyers are typically high achievers, but for some, the law is not enough. Making partner at Ellison and Gilbert and Tobin are achievements that pale in comparison to Christine Burke's climbing experience. She has conquered the world's biggest and most treacherous mountains, but it wasn't easy. She was in Sydney recently at an event hosted by Negotio Resolutions, exploring lessons in communication for any summit.
I'm a mediator and I help people with difficult conversations, but can you imagine a conversation at 8,848 metres, is that right? Probably using oxygen in a Santa suit, or something that looks like a Santa suit. There'll be some photographs. And knowing that everything that you communicate may have an impact on somebody else's life because we have to support each other to get to the top. That is a difficult conversation, and that's what Christine is going to share with us, how she coped with those challenges, climbing Everest and other places, and perhaps she might tell us about being kidnapped, although you might have to be very nice to be told about being kidnapped.
So one of the challenges on Everest and trying to communicate with your teammates is being in a situation in a low oxygen environment where you can't actually see your teammates' faces. You can't see their eyes. You can see a little bit of their movement. You can't see if they're stressed. You can't see if they're smiling. And you often can't hear what they're saying. Yet as you move up the mountain, you somehow have to work together as a team without all the normal things that you would use to communicate. As we are now, we're using visual communication. You can see by body language how someone might be feeling at a particular time. And there were a couple of times on the mountain where I made assumptions, as we all do, as to what was happening, and I was completely wrong. So on one occasion I saw one of my teammates sitting still on a rock, and I was telling myself you need to move, you need to get down the mountain. But there was a whole series of events that I had completely missed prior to me seeing this climber sitting on the mountain. And then when we got down to base camp, I discovered that there had been an issue and they were trying to resolve it. Whereas in my head, I was thinking something totally different. But because I couldn't see their eyes, couldn't see the face, couldn't communicate through the mask, I wasn't able to tune in to what was going on. In a normal office environment, we will complain about little things that are happening where we don't communicate well, someone's looked at me the wrong way, someone's yelled at me, someone's used a particular tone. In this environment, you're often yelling at each other the whole time because that's the only way you can communicate. And you're using hand signals because you can't see behind the person's mask. So it's a very tricky environment.
Christine and her climbing team narrowly escaped death on one expedition when an avalanche of snow fell just 60 metres from their camp.
We'll have avalanches in our office, avalanches of emails. We have other dramas. We have oxygen deprivation when we're under incredible stress, just as you might have on a mountain. So the themes are very much similar. Whilst you might not have to walk as far on a particular day in the office, you have other challenges that you face that make any environment challenging and difficult. So from my perspective, I love the challenge. I like seeing how hard I can push my body. I've learned along the way how hard I can push my mind, which mountaineering, I've said to a lot of people, I feel that it's 60 to 70% mental and the rest is physical. But when you make the point that you don't have that risk to life in that office environment, the analogy that I would use is you have the same stresses because it's a risk to your occupation or to your career if something goes terribly wrong. And to many people, or most people, that's a very critical thing, just as it is on a mountain when your life's at risk. It's your career when you have similar difficulties in the office environment.
Communication is vital in a law firm to prevent mental health issues and claims of bullying. As Lawyers Weekly has reported over the last few weeks, depression amongst lawyers in large firms continues to plague the profession. A poll on our website found a majority of voters believe partners are particularly prone to bullying junior staff. Poor communication and a lack of support can lead to confusion, inefficiency, and a decline in mental health and morale, both in the office and in other environments, as Christine found out.
We also had a guide who was a very dominant force, and all of us were quite scared of him. A leading mountaineer around the world, knew absolutely everything about the mountain, has climbed Denali, the mountain we looked at previously, more than any other person in the world, but he was a very dominant force, and even me, and people know that I know how to stand up for myself, certainly in the legal environment, but it made it very difficult for us to convey to him how we were feeling, what we should do on a particular day, asking questions about what we should wear, about the conditions, and because of that, people really went into their shells or into their tents and were too scared to communicate how they were feeling. As a result, we had another situation where people got very sick and had to be helped down the mountain, simply because we were too fearful to raise issues with the particular leader.
In August last year, Christine went to Carstens, the highest mountain in Australia and Oceania, located in Papua province, Indonesia. She walked for an hour and a half before running into a village and an unexpected challenge.
And we were required to stay the night in the village because we were told that we hadn't got our final permit to be allowed to proceed up the mountain. And this is a little bit unusual because normally the permit is issued a week or so before you go to the mountain, but we were none the wiser. By the next morning, we were then told that we couldn't move up the mountain because it was Sunday and the porters don't work on Sundays. And again, we thought that was a bit unusual, but we're not in a position to negotiate. Within a couple of hours, we were told by the local villagers that we had to have our gear checked, and this was a little bit unusual, but they wanted to check that we didn't have any guns. As we were having our gear checked, we sat around, we didn't do very much. They finished checking our gear, they said thank you very much, and we had lunch. While we were having lunch, our guide came in and said, there's some people outside, they want to meet you. And in West Papua, the villagers are quite fascinated by foreigners because they don't see a lot of them. So whenever we're around, particularly depending, if you've got blue eyes or blonde hair, they're quite fascinated, just as we're fascinated by them and their culture. So we thought, okay, this is pretty cool, somebody else wants to meet us. When we went outside, we were greeted by freedom fighters, or people claiming to be anti-government militia. So they were heavily armed with machetes, bows and arrows and guns. And we knew very quickly that these were not people coming for a cup of tea. And we were required to stand out in the sun for around 5 hours, and the women in our group were allowed to sit in the shade. It was very, very hot. And as we stood in the sun before we were allowed to go to the shade, they would burn the grass around our feet to intimidate us, and they were very threatening to our guides. And what they wanted was for us to pay $100,000 to go up the mountain, and they claimed that it was to recover from all the climbers that had gone before us and had failed to pay this amount of money to the freedom fighters. So when I say freedom fighters, these are people claiming so if you're familiar with West Papua is seeking independence from Indonesia. And even though in the 1970s they had a referendum and they voted to be governed by Indonesia, they realised pretty soon after that that was not something that was favourable to them as an independent or wanting to be independent province. The Indonesians receive a large amount of revenue from the mining that occurs in West Papua. And one of the major mines is called the PT Freeport mine. And 1% of the revenue from that mine, we're told, goes to the 7 tribes around the mine. the rest of the tribes don't get revenue. And as a result, the tribes are all fighting against each other and very regularly killing each other. So it's a very hostile place, and it's not a place where Westerners are particularly welcome if they have anything to do with the mine. There are many other mines there. There are Chinese mines and mines run by Americans or Australians, some small, some big. So it's not the only mine, but it's the PT Freeport mine is the one that gets the most attention because it's the world's biggest gold and copper mine. So here we are as climbers going in unescorted. We're the only Westerners in the area who are not escorted by military. So all the miners get heavily armed guards to take them from the airport to the mine. We turn up, we've got our trekking poles, and we're looking to head up the mountain. So we're a key target for anyone with hostilities towards Westerners. So unfortunately on this occasion we didn't have $100,000 to pay to go up the mountain. We indicated we weren't able to pay, and the militia leader got pretty angry, and he started to verbalise in a very hostile way to our leader, and it appeared very quickly there was a misunderstanding by the militia leader as to who we were. And once he realised that we weren't who he thought we were, he actually became a lot calmer and demanded $3,000 and our passports, and then we were ordered to leave the mountain. But we were contained for about 20 hours in total, and we were escorted by the militia back to the airport the next morning. So it wasn't a very pleasant experience. It actually took me a little bit of time to recover. We talked about escaping. We talked about them burning the hut down with us in it. They were very skilled with fire. They were very skilled with the guns. They were very skilled with the bows and arrows. And they warned us that if we didn't obey their orders, that they had killed climbers before. We left the mountain with the assistance of the New Zealand and Australian embassies, and I wasn't sure if I'd return. By December I decided I would return. I would go a different route. I had contacted human rights groups. They had contacted me. They wanted a report on what had occurred. I gave them the report that I gave to the embassies, and I went undercover. I didn't tell anybody I was going. I went with a different company. I didn't go with Westerners, and we were able to successfully ascend the mountain and get back down again.
What an amazing story, and Christine is now a full-time adventurer, but she says her mind still works in lawyer mode when she's on the mountain, something that's lost her a lot of friends but won her just as many. I hope you enjoyed this edition of the Law Report. You can find a full account of Christine's story on our website. Don't forget to follow us throughout the week on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and you can join in discussions on LinkedIn. I'm Stephanie Quine. Bye for now.